Welcome everyone to the 2020 Preschool Mindfulness Summit. Really excited to introduce you to Dr. Ronald Siegel. He has been on our summit before, so thank you so much for coming back again.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. He is the Assistant Professor of Psychology, part-time at Harvard Medical School, and is also on the board of directors and faculty at the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy. So we're really excited to have him with us. I recommend you check out his website. He's got some great videos on there that you can watch. And also he's published a lot of books, but the one that might be most practical for this audience is the Mindfulness Solution, Everyday Practices for Everyday Problems, which has lots of practical activities and tools and practices inside. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing today. So
having me.
Thanks. So Ron's session today is called Mindfulness Tools for Wise and Compassionate Parenting. So first of all, tell us why you're focusing on parenting.
Well, you know, I spent actually 25 years working as a clinical psychologist in child and family mental health. And in the early days of that, we were thinking, well, if kids are having problems, the kid could use some therapy. Let's help a child to feel understood, or perhaps help them to behave differently. And as my years went on working in that realm, it became increasingly clear to me that even if a psychotherapist was brilliant and really understood kids and could really connect with them and really understand what was causing them distress, and let's say that the psychotherapist was super skilled and within a 50-minute session, he or she could resolve, let's call it 1 unit of psychological distress in the course of that session. But in the intervening week, in school life, in home life, in family life, the child was accumulating 1.5 units of distress. Well, the slope wasn't going to look very good. This wouldn't be so great. But if we could do a little something to help those of us who care for kids to do that more wisely, more compassionately, more skillfully, that would go a long way toward helping kids. And in fact, most kids, even kids who have been through some very, very rough times, if they have enough, metaphorically, sunlight, soil, water, nobody's pulling them up by the roots, chances are they're going to find a way to grow and thrive. So it started to occur to me and my colleagues that really the place to be working was to help those of us, all of us, parents, teachers, everybody who cares for kids, to find ways to be more effective in our own presence. And if we could do that, things were going to improve for their kids. And, one other source of evidence for this, I'm the father of twin daughters now, very much past preschool. They're both 30. And my wife, who's also a clinical psychologist, and we noticed such a clear pattern when they were growing up. When my wife and I were having trouble in our own hearts and minds, or particularly having trouble getting along with one another, our kids' behavior deteriorated. It really plummeted. They were, they'd be cranky, they'd have difficulty, their sleep wasn't as good, everything went south. When my wife and I got it together, when we were basically in states of greater mental health and greater relational health with one another, miraculously, the kids were thriving. And we started noticing that it's probably not just a correlation. There's a causal arrow here, that we adults, particularly when we're talking about preschoolers, it's our capacity for emotional regulation, our capacity for presence that provides the emotional regulation that kids need. So if we can improve that, we can go a long way toward helping our kids. And indeed, mindfulness practices and compassion practices, to my mind, are one of the best tools we've got to do that.
Yeah, yeah, so true what you what you just said about our own well-being and our own state of mind and relationships and how that affects. I know that's true in my house as well. So thanks for sharing that. So Ron, tell us what you mean when you say wise and compassionate parenting.
What's interesting, this thinking about wisdom and compassion actually came from originally a conversation that I was having. This is over a decade ago with my friend and colleague, Chris Germer, who's done a lot to develop sort of self-compassion work. And back then, this was before he got into that, we were having a conference at Harvard Medical School in which we were graced with the presence of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And we were trying to think, well, how are we going to structure this conference? What are we going to do? What would matter? What would be the best use of our time? And Chris and I remember we were walking through some woods on Cape Cod, which is a natural area near us, talking about this. And we were thinking, okay, at this stage in our lives, and we were, I guess, in our mid-50s at the time, we're thinking if we wanted to see a psychotherapist, what would we look for in that therapist? And we thought, well, it wouldn't be so much who was up on the latest research findings or even who had studied the most different kinds of psychotherapeutic methods. We'd want somebody who is wise, by which we meant had some understanding of what really matters in life and was able to live in congruence with that understanding of what really matters, and compassionate, basically meaning could tolerate our suffering and could relate to our suffering with a wish to help and with a kind of open-heartedness. In fact, the thought of seeing a therapist who was unwise or uncompassionate was like ridiculous. Nobody would ever want to do that, right? So that got we actually wrote a book, Wisdom and Compassion in Psychotherapy. We edited a book based on this. And it really got me into thinking about what is wisdom and what is compassion and how they are guiding principles for doing anything we're doing in the world well, including parenting. And the conclusions were this, that wisdom, it's so interesting studying wisdom because every culture has a word for wisdom and it's considered like the highest value in most cultures, but it's very hard to define like exactly what it is. In fact, in this regard, wisdom is a little bit like something else. Those of you who are Americans who are a little bit older who are watching this may remember this very famous quote by a Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart. And Potter Stewart was hearing a landmark case having to do with pornography. And in the US, we have the First Amendment to our Constitution, which basically guarantees the right to freedom of expression. But there are limits. You're not allowed to yell, fire in a crowded theater, for example. If it's really destructive to the public good, there are limits to freedom of expression. And the whole issue of pornography, when's it art and when's it not, had come up. And Potter Stewart said, in trying to define pornography, he said, it's very difficult to define, but I know it when I see it. And the same is absolutely true of wisdom, right? It is hard to define it, but we definitely know it when we see it. Right? We can think of who we know in our life who's wise. And people have actually tried to study this. And what they've come up with by asking people cross-culturally to describe wise people is that wise people tend to act in the world with concern for the benefit of those near and far, so for ourselves and those around us, as well as the greater community, in both the short run and the long run. And the opposite of wisdom, which we all know quite well, is actually called foolishness, right? Foolishness is the word that best captures this opposite of wisdom. And that's when it's concerned for me in the short run, right? And we all know what it's like to be foolish. And parenting, the heroic task of parenting, really requires wisdom, right? Because in the short run, it's, you're driving me crazy, I want you to stop, and we start screaming, right? Not such a good strategy in the long run. Also, it's about me, whereas in, parenting working well, yes, we have to take care of our kids ourselves, but for the larger purpose of taking care of our kids. So it's this capacity to hold in mind what's going to be better for the greater good and in the long run, which is a central part to good parenting, and it's a central part to wisdom. The compassion side is it's really about harnessing our better angels. Paul Gilbert, who's in the UK, has developed something called compassion-focused therapy. And he likes to talk about there being 3 broad motivational systems that operate in humans and really determine what we do each day. The first system is the fight or flight system, right? This is our fear-based system. It's our most basic survival system. When we're threatened, we circle the wagons, we figure out some way to respond to that. And we all know what fight or flight feels like. Every moment that we're anxious, every moment we're frightened, every moment that we're tense, or every moment that we're annoyed or angry, we're in fight or flight. Sometimes we're in freeze, which is like we're totally overwhelmed, but usually we go to fight or flight. And this system we share with all the other animals, even insects. Our second system is our kind of drive and vitality and achievement system. This is the system that helps us to get up in the morning, to go to work, to earn money, to build a house, to go buying supplies for our kids, going school shopping. It's the drive to get things done to prepare for the next challenge, right? And on the most basic level, it's food and shelter and sex, reproduction. But on a more refined level, it's all the achievements in our life. And there's a kind of hierarchical arrangement between this first and second system, right? If we're really threatened, well, forget about shopping, get out of the way of the bus, right? If we're threatened, that system takes over. We forget about longer term goals and the things we're striving for. But if we're not threatened and we feel kind of safe, then we move towards satisfaction. How can we get these needs met? And it's only when those other 2 systems are really quiet and are okay, we're both safe and we're satisfied, that we can then move to activate this third really important system in humans. And sometimes it's called the rest and digest system because it's how we calm and soothe ourselves, but it's also called the mammalian tend and befriend system, because this is the system that involves nurturing. This is the system where when we see a cute puppy, we just want to take care of the puppy or the kitten, or for that matter, our kids, at least when they're being cute, rather than when they're being difficult, right? Yeah. And this nurturing system, this loving system, is actually the system that is most necessary for compassion, right? Because compassion is feeling the suffering of another and having the wish to help them in some way. Right? And we feel compassion only when this tend and befriend system is activated, when we feel this natural, loving, nurturing side of us. And anyone who's been a parent or a caretaker of kids for more than a few moments knows this is golden. When this system is engaged, we're motivated and we go out of our way to do what the child or the kitten or the puppy needs. When the system is offline, we've got a real problem. In fact, as parents, when we're stuck in fight or flight, we tend not to be too skillful, right? That's when we start screaming. That's when we get frozen with our fears. Also, when we're stuck in drive and achievement, right? Like that's when we're on our smartphone rather than listening to our kid. That's when we're just doing the grocery list and not paying attention to what's happening interpersonally. And I'm not saying that the fight or flight system and the drive system aren't necessary and important, but it's also important to be able to relax them sometimes and to be able to just tune in to this kind of connected, loving state. So it occurred to me that much as good psychotherapy requires wisdom and compassion, good parenting requires wisdom and compassion. And using mindfulness to try to cultivate these might be really, really helpful to help us take care of our kids.
Yeah, wow. So really, really interesting. And I think what you said is so on the ball. Like there's so many times when we get, I guess, into those other 2 systems and just forget about the third one. So tell us when we think about parenting preschool children, what do you think is the most important? I'm guessing it would be the third system that you just talked about.
Yeah, I think it's the third system, as well as the capacity to not act impulsively.
Okay.
At least for me, when I was a parent of preschoolers, it was rarely were the mistakes that my wife and I made the result of careful deliberation and thinking. They weren't what happened. I was sitting around calmly thinking, well, she really needs more limits, but I want her to feel loved. How are we going to find the balance between the two? And let's be careful to not have just one of us be the limit setter and the other one giving the loving supply. That's not what we made our big mistake. Not that those problems were easy to figure out or solve, but those weren't the biggest mistakes. The biggest mistakes were, a kid did something that scared me, and it was like, the preschool equivalent of you're grounded for the next 2 years. You are never going to see another chocolate chip cookie for as long as you live. That kind of, those were the mistakes. Were always the things that we did impulsively. It's really interesting. Going back to the work in child community mental health, I remember so often there'd be this kind of classic scene, and sometimes I was the expert psychologist called in to help. So there's the school principal, there's the parent, the kid, and there's the teacher, all in the room, and the kid has just done something unbelievably harebrained, right? It's like, ran off into the street, on the school trip, ignoring the teacher's, scream, "Stop, Johnny, stop." and you're sitting in the principal's office, and it's, the question always comes up, "Johnny, what were you thinking?" And the answer, of course, is Johnny wasn't thinking at all. He had feeling, an impulse, and action following on that. Well, the same thing for us. When we're not thinking, when we're just acting impulsively as parents, that's when we make all the big mistakes. In fact, there's a book, forget the guy's name. It was written by a Harvard psychiatrist and his daughter, who's a comedian. And the book, I don't know if it's okay to swear on the series, but the title of the book is "Fuck Feelings," right? What's a psychiatrist book? That title all about, right? Well, it's an attention getter. It's good for that, for sure. But I heard him interviewed, and he was saying, look, the point is not that feelings aren't important. Of course, they're very important. But they're not a great guide for decision making. What we want to do is we want to feel our feelings, but make our decisions based on our values, right? On what, in considered reflection, not in fight or flight, not in desperate drive mode, in considered reflection, what do we think actually matters to us? And this is so true, when it comes to parenting little kids. So one of the ways that mindfulness practices can be important for developing these capacities here of wisdom and compassion, and really the ability to not just act impulsively, is they help us to take a breath. Whenever we're sitting doing some mindfulness practice and noticing that an urge to scratch an itch arises, or an urge to change our posture because something's achy arises, and we move to fix it. We practice in mindfulness practice, not just fixing it, but just letting ourselves feel it. Staying with the sensation of the itch or the ache, letting it arise, and noticing that sometimes it passes, even if we don't do anything to try to fix it. That becomes a golden learning opportunity and a golden lesson to use in the rest of our life. That means that when we're feeling the anger arising in response to our kid, or the fear arising in response to our kid, we don't necessarily have to act in a big way immediately. I mean, sometimes we do. We have to keep the kids safe and stuff. But we don't have to then launch into the punishment or, launch into solving the problem in a big way. We can actually wait until our nervous system calms down, think about it, and make a considered and design a considered response based on our values. Because so often, I remember kidding with he didn't know I was kidding at first with our pediatrician when our daughters were of preschool age. They were maybe 2 years old or so, 2.5. And, we were at the well baby visit, and we talking about how they were doing, and he did a physical exam. They seemed okay. They seemed to be eating okay and sleeping okay. And he said, so what about their social and emotional health? How are they doing? And my wife said, they seem okay. Sometimes they cooperate with each other. Sometimes they fight, but, they play, and they seem loving and engaged. And I said, I agree with all that, but I do have one concern. And he said, "Oh, well, what's that?" And I said, "Well, they both seem to be acutely suicidal." And, he laughed because, we would turn our back and one of them would dive for the stairs, in a protected electrical outlet, try to open the car door. Preschoolers, they're suicidal. They're constantly doing harebrained things that if we don't, intervene, they're going to kill themselves. So it's not that we don't need to act,
right. Yeah.
in those situations. But as soon as the immediate threat is over, then we can take a breath. Then we can take some time and perhaps not just act out of our instinct.
Yeah, I think it's so hard in that moment unless I think we practice and learn these skills. So could you share, Ron, some ideas that parents might do that might be effective when working with children of this age, or things they can do for themselves as well?
Absolutely. I mean, the first and foremost is to actually take up some mindfulness practice ourselves. And that's very busy if you're a busy parent with little kids. So, finding a half hour to sit and meditate and watch, follow the breath or listen to the sounds of nature, that may not be coming. But we can take shorter times. I'm a big fan of informal mindfulness practices. And those are basically practices that we do during the course of our day where we're accomplishing something else, but we're doing what we do in a mindful fashion. So when washing the dishes, we can simply bring our attention to the sensations of the dishes, to the soapy water, to what they look like, and let that be a bit of a meditation practice. When we're taking a shower, assuming you still have time for a shower, we can actually feel, the sensations of the droplets, caressing our bodies. After all, in the developed world, showers are like these Goldilocks experiences. You get in, a little too cold, a little too warm, just right. And there really are thousands of droplets caressing our naked body. It's a very sensual experience if we can tune in. But if we spend the whole shower on our to-do list, we get to the end and we think, did I wash my hair or was that yesterday? We can be completely distracted. So we can pay attention in the shower. We can pay attention when walking the dog. We can pay attention when driving to just the sights and sounds around us, and just gradually practice bringing our attention out of the thought stream and into the present moment. Because the more we do this, the less we then immediately identify with and believe in every one of our thoughts. And the more we have a chance to notice, okay, I'm scared. Okay, I'm annoyed. Okay, something's threatening me here in this interaction with my child. And as we can see that, we feel like we don't have to act on it right away. My wife was, first I heard from a friend of mine, this is a psychotherapist trick, that when you find yourself in psychotherapy, getting anxious, you're thinking things aren't going so well, and you start talking too much, right? There's an acronym to help. It's called WAIT. It stands for, why am I talking?
Okay.
And it's just a moment to reflect, wait a minute, is what I'm saying useful here? Or am I doing this, because I'm all agitated and I'm desperate and I'm trying to do something? Well, the same's true in parenting, Sometimes we just have to, be quiet a little bit and listen and not just take action, because we need to assess what's going on here. My wife later with my cousin's husband came up with another acronym for when it's really, really hard, and it's called BLURT. And BLURT stands for Better Left Unsaid, that's the BLU part, comma, really try. And that's when we're, so the more we practice mindfulness, the more we can wait and the less we blurt, right? And we have, we're a little bit better at that. If we have time to actually spend a few minutes, even 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we're picking up our kid at school, we're sitting in the car, we're going on the subway to get them, to just, close the eyes, feel the breath, and allow all the thoughts and the feelings and the impulses to come and go. That little period of time can help. It's anything we can do to have a few moments to step out of the thought stream and come into the presence of sensory reality, whatever's actually happening here and now, gives us this capacity to not act so impulsively.
Yeah, I love the informal practices as well, and I think also for teachers, that's a great tool to have in your tool belt when you have a class of 30 of these little children that all have such different personalities, and there's so much going on, as being able to have that pause, I guess, between your initial thoughts and your reactions. So, Ron, what about when parents working with their own children? Do you recommend that parents kind of introduce any exercises or tools to their preschoolers, or
Sure. There's lots of ways. I mean, again, this is within the context that if we're looking for the biggest bang for the buck,
yeah,
it's our own practice. I
yes.
think that becomes essential, especially when kids are really little, right?
Yeah,
Because their capacity for attention is somewhat limited. Well, I'll say a couple of things about that. Actually, let me come back to that in a moment, because let me just say a few words about the compassion side for the parenting also, and particularly nod to developing some self-compassion for, I have never met this is going to sound terrible. Maybe I'll revise this, but it's kind of what I think. Let me put it this way. Most good parents have a lot of doubts about their parenting.
Right.
I'll just put it that way, right? And that's because it can be so hard to know what to do, right? Yeah. That love or limits discussion that I was mentioning before, absolutely. Whenever we're working with kids, do they need the limit or do they need more love? And very often they pull in opposite directions, right? Yeah. That the limit would say, okay, you're going to get a timeout now because, you just hit your sister, and that's not allowed. Right. Yeah. And that's a limit. But the kids are, and it hurts and they're in pain. So the love part of us wants to soothe the child who's hurting. And in fact, we know that the reason why he hit his sister was we're paying attention to his sister, and it's been really painful for him to have to, to share our attention. Right. So the love part says, I need to give him more loving attention so that he'll feel sufficiently satisfied that he won't have to, attack his sister. His sister won't be such a threat. Now, the two of these pull in very different directions, right? And they call for very different behaviors on our part. And if we're a good parent, I think we're going to be confused. We're going to think, well, I see the merits to both. And we're going to kind of trust our intuition and go more with one or the other in the moment. But we're going to be quite confused. The other thing is, if we're a good parent, we're going to see ourselves making mistakes all the time. We're going to do stuff. I have a friend and colleague, Trudy Goodman. I may have mentioned her in previous times in this series. She now runs a meditation center called Insight LA. If any of you are in the LA area, she's a great teacher. Anyway, she coined this term parenting crimes. And parenting crimes refers to all the things we do as a parent that we can't believe we did. And if you happen to be a psychologist like I am, well, it's doubly bad. You should know better. And if you're a psychologist with child training, it's completely unconscionable. How could you have done it? And very often what goes wrong for us in parenting is we commit one of these parenting crimes because we get frightened or we get angry and we do something and we know that it wasn't really skillful, or we get worried about something at work and we zone out and we're on our phone, or we know that our kid's feeling deprived, or we're in an argument with our spouse or partner and we know that's dysregulating our kid. We do something that makes a mess, right? And then we feel horrible because most of us feel like our first job is to be a good parent. and we realize I'm being a bad parent. And we start criticizing ourselves, thinking, I can't believe I'm such a horrible parent. And look at the other parents, look at how well they handle it. Look at how well Mr. Rogers handled that. I'm nothing like Mr. Rogers. This is horrible, right? and what happens when we beat ourselves up? Well, we get even more into fight or flight, right? Because we feel like, we feel frightened that we're blowing it, and we can't stand the sort of self-esteem collapse that comes from thinking we're a bad parent. And that doesn't make us any more skillful. So a really important tool in our arsenal is how to be kind to ourselves when we're parenting. And how do we find a way to recognize that, everybody who's ever done this job, and same for teaching, anyone who's ever done this job and has been at all honest with themselves feels like, oh gosh, let's say a lot of moments are suboptimal, right? Are not exactly as we want them to look. And they certainly don't look like the baby food commercials, and they certainly don't look like the car seat commercials, that it's very different what goes on in our actual lives. And so we need some way to be kind to ourselves. One way is to simply talk to other parents who are honest, because it is really helpful, or talk to other teachers who are honest. It's really helpful to know that good people trying the best they can find these tests to be very, very daunting, and very often don't behave optimally. And the other thing is finding some way to be kind to ourselves, figuring out, in addition to mindfulness, how can we self-soothe? What are the things that make us feel like that bring Mr. Rogers into our own hearts? Like, it's okay, sweetheart. You're okay the way you are. Because we have to be able to do this for ourselves if we're going to be able to do it for our kids. And because if we're harsh and critical toward ourselves, we're going to be harsh and critical toward our kids. One of my patients once said to me, do unto others as you'd like them to do unto you, is not just like a biblical injunction, it's a law of nature. Like, if we're judgmental toward ourselves, we'll be judgmental toward the kid. If we're judgmental toward the kid, we'll be judgmental toward ourselves. We need a way to be loving toward everybody here, ourselves as well as the children we're caring for. So that's the sort of compassion practices, including the self-compassion practices. Many of your listeners probably know that there are these practices called loving kindness practices. You usually begin by calling to mind somebody that you think of as naturally loving and kind. Let's say, could be a religious figure like, the Dalai Lama, or the Pope, or Mother Teresa, or somebody like that, Nelson Mandela. It could be a kind of more mythic figure like Jesus, or Mohammed, or Moses, or the Buddha. It could be a loving friend. It could be even an animal that's naturally loving, or a nice place in nature. So you bring to mind something or someone that's naturally loving, and just start by wishing them well. And there are traditional phrases used for this, like, may you be safe, may you be peaceful, may you be free from suffering, may you live with ease. But you can make up your own. It's just whatever wishes, wishing something positive for the other. And then once you've felt a little bit of this warmth inside of you, a little bit this loving warmth, turn it around and bring it back to yourself. Imagine that this naturally loving being is here with you, and join them. May I be safe. May I be peaceful. May I be free from suffering. May I live with ease. It actually helps to put the hands over the heart and let ourselves feel this. And just taking this in a bit, wishing it for ourselves, and then maybe wishing it for our kids, wishing it for other people we care about. Sometimes this is expanded out, and wishing it for the whole world. Starts to become a way that we can bring some of this loving warmth, bring some of the "it's okay, sweetheart" from Mr. Rogers into the experience of parenting, even as we go about it as a not so perfect parent, right? Because we're all we're all constantly reacting in ways that we know aren't the best, but they're the best we can do at the moment.
I think it's so important, Ron, the self-compassion aspect. And so many people, I think, in caregiving positions like teachers and parents, they sometimes don't take that step or have those important tools in their toolbox. So I think the more we can spread awareness about that, the more children will be helped in the end, as you mentioned before, starting with ourselves. So
Yeah,
yeah, very
I think you're
important
having my
topic.
friend, I'm sorry, I think you're having my friend Susan Pollack on, who's written a whole book
Yes.
about self-compassion and parenting, which is zeroing in on this very important skill.
Yes, yeah, she's amazing. I interviewed her last week, I think, and yeah, her book is great. So we'll be highlighting that as well on the summit, because lots of great practical practices for parents in there. Well, thank you, Ron, so much for sharing. Is there any last words or anything else you'd like to share before we finish today?
Well, I would just add that indeed, teaching mindfulness practices to kids is also helpful. We're
Yeah.
not, this is not instead of that, but it is probably the place to start. And I think the thing I would most add is that all of the judgments about ourselves, all the ways in which our self-esteem is on the line while we're parenting, and this is certainly true for folks who are stay-at-home parents. It's certainly true for folks who are teachers, where this is your job, is to be a competent caregiver. Whenever we hold it as a high value to do a good job of caring for kids, it's really easy to get stuck on a self-esteem roller coaster and always feel that we're not doing it well enough. And I think the biggest take-home point would be that none of this is a referendum on our worth as a person, whether we're good or bad, and to get it that, we're all doing absolutely the best we can with the equipment we've got. And if we remind ourselves of that and work together at, trying to do as good a job as we can, we'll be kinder to ourselves, and that'll make us kinder to our kids, and they'll have a better chance of being kinder to their kids.
Very wise and compassionate words. So thank you so much, Ron. And thank you for coming on again and sharing all those thoughts and ideas and tools with us on the summit today.
Thank you for having me again.
Thanks. And just a reminder, Ron has a video called The Science of Mindfulness, which we'll have the link to below, and his contact information and information about the books that he's written as well. So thanks again.
Bye-bye.